Vitthala 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 Hari Om Vitthala 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 Hari Om Vitthala 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 Hari Om Vitthala 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 Hari Om Vitthala 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 Hari Om Vitthala 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 Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate Shanti Shanti Shanti. Welcome to satsang. How do I tell the difference between the voice of God and the voice of my ego? There isn't one simple equation. It's not like the voice of God comes in, B minor, and the voice of your ego comes in C, and you can say, well, if it's this tone or this frequency, it's the voice of God. If it's that tone or that frequency, it's your ego. But there are some indicators. The voice of the ego tends to be the same thing that you've heard in different ways throughout your life. So there's a pattern to the ego. And we all have different patterns, but if we practice introspection, we start to learn what our patterns are. And so, for example, we may have a pattern that always feels, let's say, a victim of things. And so you're in a situation and you start a project, a plan, a something, and suddenly there's a voice in your head that says, it's never going to work. If you know that you have a pattern of feeling like a victim, feeling like someone who everything is against, it's pretty clear that as you embark on a new activity, a new program, a new project, something, that the voice in your head that says, it's not going to work, somebody's already thought better, somebody's going to stop it, that's going to be the same voice, just about a new situation, as a voice you've heard your whole life. If you know that you have a pattern in life of starting things but not finishing them, that for whatever reason you've got this kind of self-sabotage, I start but I don't finish things. And again, you find yourself in a new project, a new program, a new job, a new relationship, a new situation. And you're working and it's going very well and things are moving in the right direction. And then suddenly you hear a voice in your head that says, gotta get out of here. Have to leave this. Not a right relationship, not a right job, not a right situation, not a right project. Again, it requires a bit of introspection and insight, because today it may be about a project you're doing for some new company. And in school, maybe it was about projects in school, maybe it was even about graduating, maybe whatever it's been about through your life, it's going to manifest in different ways. But it's that same pattern. A lot of us have patterns within the ego that keep us, maybe you have a pattern that says, I can't trust the world. People will hurt you. Maybe in your life you were abandoned or betrayed or abused in some way that left a deep impression. So that's a pattern. And again, you find yourself in a new situation or job or relationship. And again, there's a voice. It's got to get out. Can't trust. Well, again, if you're really clear and honest and you look back, you'll realize, this is that same voice in my head that says, can't trust. I'm going to be hurt. That's getting me out before I get hurt. And we could do this all night. We could come up with hundreds of different patterns that we have. And how the ego keeps reinforcing those patterns. Because that's what it does. And it does that not because it's an evil enemy, but it does that because the goal is that we should be able to work through them. The ego is that which keeps us stuck in patterns. But those patterns are there for us to be able to ultimately work through and be free of. And this is why we always say spiritually, it's not about annihilating the ego, smashing the ego, killing the ego. Because the ego was formed in your life based on your situations to actually help you understand and survive and navigate situations usually in childhood. That's how it got formed and created. Now it becomes, though, that which holds us back. And so when you hear a voice and you're wondering, is this God's voice? Or is this just my ego? A good first question is this the very first time I've heard this type of voice? Is this the very first time that I have been guided down a path like this, or scared off a path like this? And if not, if you're able to look back at your life and say, ah, yeah, I remember. Every time that I was about to succeed or about to complete something or achieve something, that voice in my head would scare me off. Either make me leave the situation or unconsciously make me make a mistake that was going to make it not happen even though I knew better, but just something came over me. And I don't know what it was. To just sabotage it all. We actually know a lot more about our own psyches than most of us like to admit, because it's not the most empowering thing when we admit it. A lot of times it's embarrassing. You look back and you're like, oh yeah, God, I've got this really crazy pattern, and it leads me to do this, or it leads me to think like that, or it leads me to miss these opportunities, or not to expand. And so a lot of us try not to look at that, because that mirror of the self a lot of times is not something that's really fun to look into. But it's essential to look into it. And it's essential to look into it with love and compassion. Because that's the other thing then that happens to a lot of us when we realize it's the voice of the ego, is we're like, oh God, again? Like, come on. You know, how do I have to just keep getting run by this ego? And then we feel badly. But this is why it's so important to look in our own mirror. Puja Swamiji always says, face your book. He says, Facebook is fine, but we must remember to face our book. To really look in that mirror. But do so with love and compassion, so that we're not squeezing our eyes closed at how embarrassing they are. But we recognize the voice of God, not the same pattern, with light. It's about very rare from God house, or which selves, science. I heard that in my life. Story, right? That if they're micro, never met distinct through our, or what Puja to order that are really important. Not been exact on our lives, based on poverty, that listening happens when I run from boredom. I know it happens when, or run a never again, because, oh my God, my whole life? Well, that's too long. All right, well, might as well start tomorrow if we're talking about my whole life. Might as well start next Monday. It's much more auspicious. The New Year is coming up in a few months. I could start in the New Year. I mean, I've got my whole life. Never again is a long time. Might as well start, next year. But when you realize that we're simply talking, each moment, each decision, is there an alternative? Just ask yourself in that moment, if the moment gives you an opportunity to make a decision based on fear or courage, and you've always made it based on fear, ask yourself, is there an alternative? Yeah, I know I'm being led by fear. Is there an alternative? And if there is, see what it's like to take it just once. What happens if you don't act in fear? Or if you're being pulled by desire? And then, of course, the rationalization of the mind that explains to us why it's the best thing to do. And you've always made decisions like that, or that's a pattern for you. Ask yourself, is there an alternative? If I weren't going to make this decision based out of just desire, what would the alternative be? If I'm bored or I'm frustrated, or it's just too still and not enough drama, and I know that in my life I have a pattern of creating drama because the boredom threatens me. The stillness frustrates me. Ask yourself, what would happen if I didn't create drama right now? What would happen if I didn't sabotage myself right now? Or tell myself the same thing that I've always heard? Is there an alternative? And then take it. Just once. See what happens. And then take it again. Because ultimately when we talk about the highest goal of a spiritual life being freedom, this is what it is. It's the freedom to not always act the same way. To not always engage in the same patterns. There's no right answer of thou shalt always do this or do that. The goal is thou shalt be free, inside. Free from the calls of the desires, the fears, the ego, the programming, the voices in our heads. Absolutely free to make the decision that is the right one for my highest and fullest unfolding spiritually. But that's very hard for most of us. That's why in my life, for example, I always say, well, God had to literally shout at me from the clouds. Because I didn't listen. It was so in order to hear it. But try to see whether you can listen before it gets booming. Can you listen to that voice that's guiding you toward surrender, expansion within, a changing of the inner world rather than a changing of the outer world, that's leading you from a space of contentment and perfection rather than frustration or misery or jealousy or greed or desire or fear. See what happens if you make decisions, choices based on that. Because then you're totally free to literally just move as the river of the divine wants to move you. And that's ultimately the highest purpose and point. Are there any questions here? Yeah.
So, say you've heard the voice of God, so to speak, and it doesn't make sense.
Okay.
Is it possible or normal for the ego to come in and create confusion?
So she said, say you've heard the voice of God and it doesn't make sense. Is it possible for the ego then to come in and create confusion? Of course. Of course, the ego loves to do that. Because frequently the voice of God is a voice that pulls us away from what everyone else is doing, or what we've always done, or what our culture or our society or the upbringing we were given said to do. And that's why we end up hearing that voice, because if we were just following in the footsteps of what we've always done, we wouldn't necessarily need to hear that voice, because that was the direction that the river was taking us in anyway. So when you hear that voice, of course the ego comes in. And the ego comes in, by the way, whether that voice makes sense or not. Because a lot of times you hear that voice and the ego realizes, oh my God, my reign over this ship is going to come to an end. I've been able to steer this ship all these years based out of these patterns that I've created. And when that voice of God comes in, guiding us in a different within ourselves, the ego no longer can run the show. And so it's going to do what in, that courage comes in. And this is where it's so important to ask yourself all the time, what is my highest goal? Because the voice of God does not always take us into that which is comfortable, into that which feels good, that which is enjoyable, that which is fun, as I speak about so much. But it takes us into those situations and that truth and those experiences that will burn the ignorance, that'll burn the not self. And so we really have to ask ourselves, what am I praying for? Is my prayer just, oh God, could you kind of maintain this status quo in a really nice, peaceful sort of way, all of the, comforts that I have, keep them there, the people that I know, the people that I like, if you could just kind of keep everything in place for me and make it really nice and comfortable so there's not too much threat or conflict or whatever. Is that what we want? And remember, there's no wrong or right. I'm not, and none of us are, the spiritual police, the moral police to say, here's what you should pray for, here's what you should want. But we, at least each of us individually, should be clear of what our goal is and therefore what our prayer is, so that we know which voices to listen to inside. And so is the prayer simply, could you just kind of take care of the things around me and make sure that they're all there when I wake up in the morning, and that I'm not too challenged or stretched emotionally, spiritually. Make sure people are nice to me, make sure they respect me, make sure that nothing challenges me too deeply. Or is our prayer to God, whatever it takes, wake me up for God's sakes. Whatever it takes, show me the truth. Whatever it takes, free me of this ego. Because those are two totally different prayers. And if our prayer is the second one, if our prayer is awakening, truth, self, enlightenment, total awareness, consciousness at all moments, well, God is going to do whatever is needed to give us that. And it's not usually, unfortunately, simply kind of a gentle tap on the head with a magic wand. Okay, you're awakened, you're awakened, you're awakened. Oh, you wanted just the ice cream. Okay, ice cream for you. You wanted awakening. You wanted a car. Here's the car. It's not like, Christmas morning of under the tree, you get a box of awakening and you get, the chemistry set you wanted. When what we pray for is that freedom, is that awakening, is that total experience of truth, well, the universe has to therefore pull everything away that is not that. It's like, think about it, when a child physically lying in bed, picture a child lying in bed under the covers with the stuffed animal and the favorite blanket and the head under the pillow. Well, that's really a cozy place to be. Nothing wrong with it. But it's not awake, it's asleep, it's in bed. Cozy, nonetheless, but in bed. But if the goal is to wake up, well, what it means is that the mother or the father or the babysitter, whoever wakes up this child, has to pull off the cozy blanket, has to pull the stuffed animal out of the kid's hands, have to pull the pillow off his head, have to pull the other blankie out from in his arms. And that kid's going to cry. Because it was really cozy in bed. But if he has to go to school, parents all over the world drag their kids out of bed when the kids cry because they've got to go to school. And the parents know, yeah, he's crying now, but he'll thank me later. When he actually graduates high school instead of fails out of high school, he's going to thank me for the fact that I pulled him out of bed. In the same way, when the universe, when God pulls away from us that which is our sort of metaphoric safety blanket, because on some level, consciously or subconsciously, or in our karmic package, we've said, I want to wake up. Enlightenment, this life. Moksha, this life. Well, then God has to pull off the blankets and pull the pillow off from your head and pull that stuffed animal from out of your hands. But with the same love and compassion that the parents drag the child out of school to go to, out of bed to go to school. And we realize that we kick and we scream like kids in bed. Just 5 more minutes, just 10 more minutes. I have a stomach ache. Teacher said school was canceled today. Right? I mean, kids also, all kinds of stories. Oh, my math test, it was canceled. Yeah, the teacher said, I don't have to come to school for 3 weeks. I'm so smart. And in the same way we do it, we come up with all kinds of rationalizations and stories. And just like parents know that their kid is pulling their leg, that deep, deep inner self knows that we're just making stories. But it takes a lot of courage and a lot of surrender to really listen to that inner voice. And that's why the ego usually wins. Because it's the voice we've known forever. It's what's guided our life forever. It's what's familiar to us. And then we've got the rationalizing mind as, well, things aren't that bad anyway. I've got a pretty good life. What's the problem? Look at all these people. They're living just the same way I'm living. And on it goes. And this is actually why, interestingly, people who have suffered severe trauma, life-threatening illnesses, near-death experiences, loss of a child, war, just horrible, horrible traumatic things. so many of them, in retrospect, will say, it's that which actually brought me this close to spirituality. It's that which, because everything that I thought I knew was pulled away from me, that I actually have become that spiritually grounded. I've heard so many people say, thank God I had this terminal illness. As horrible and crazy as that may sound. Thank God I went through this horribly traumatic situation, because if I hadn't, I would have kept living that, Brady Bunch existence where everything is just kind of fine. Why look deeper? And so that's when the universe pulls things away from us that drop us deeper. But it also happens the other way when we make that prayer for the awakening at all costs, for the enlightenment, for the truth, for the moksha. But it takes a lot of courage to listen to that voice inside. Are there any other questions?
One can I ask?
Sure, of course.
How do I know that as a human being, whether I'm evolving, stagnating, deteriorating? Is there any self-assessment that one can?
Great. So we'll take this as the last question. And he said, how do I know as a human being whether I'm growing, I'm evolving, or I'm stagnating? Spiritual growth is something that doesn't really have very specific markings or points. People sometimes will say, so I was meditating and I saw this color light. What step is that? What level am I at? And there is no level. There is no sense of, this color light is phase 1 and that color light is phase 2 and then beyond all lights is phase... Nothing like that. Some people see lights. Some people don't. Some people see shapes. Some people don't. Nothing to do with levels or... But there are a lot of markings in how we move through the world, how we think, how we choose, how we decide, how we speak, how we act. And this is where, in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna asks Lord Krishna, well, what are the signs? What are the signs of a real yogi, of a real wise person, an awakened person? And Lord Krishna gives us this beautiful list. And it has to do, for example, with being balanced. So something bad happens, loss, failure, compared to success or gain. But we're pretty even. In most of our lives, it has to do really with things like, how frequently do you lose your temper? So if you used to have an anger issue and maybe you would lose your temper 5 times a day, but now you only lose your temper once a day, well, you're getting better. That's a real concrete way to know I'm getting better. I used to shout 5 times a day. Now I only shout once a day. I'm going to keep going until it's once a week and then not at all. If we have a tendency toward competition, You find that it used to be as you were moving through the world, you were always kind of competing against, feeling jealousy, feeling envy, feeling judgment. Why do they get a bigger chapati? Why do they have more potatoes? Look, I got less. That's not fair. You know, this person, he's chewing with his mouth open. That's not good manners. And, you know, or this person doesn't know how to do that. Or they're bad at this. I'm better at it. I should have been the one who got that praise or that job or that whatever it may be. Constant sort of competitiveness with the world around us. And then if you notice that it's getting less, that wow, a whole day went by and you didn't find yourself looking at how much potatoes the person next to you got compared to how big your chapati was, and whether, you know, a mutual friend was nicer to someone else than to you, or look, a whole day went by. You weren't competing. You weren't noticing what someone else had. Their watch is nicer than your watch. Their jewels are nicer than your jewels. Their car is nicer than your car. You went a whole day and you didn't compete inside. That's definite progress. If you're someone who tends to be a gossip, again, kind of negative and judging, and you're always sort of criticizing other people in your mind or to others. Did you see this one? Oh yeah, he's just like that. She's just like that. And you didn't do it for a whole day. It's progress. Or criticizing yourself. Did a whole day go by that you didn't say to yourself, oh, you are so stupid? That's progress. So our spiritual growth manifests in our emotional state, in our psychological health, and in our external words and actions. And so while we can't measure it based on what you're seeing in meditation, we certainly can measure it by how you're moving through the world. And so people who are in the throes of grabbing or pushing away or judging or criticizing or wanting, coveting. If you think about what most of our cultures use as kind of the vices or the 7 deadly sins, or however our particular cultural or religious background defines them, they're pretty similar. Anger and greed and envy and lust and So how often did I engage in that today? How often did my thoughts go toward lust, toward greed, toward anger, toward judgment, toward criticism? And how often did they not? Keep it tight, keep a diary, keep a, on your calendar. 5 thoughts of greed today. 5 times I looked at what someone else had, wished it was mine. That jacket, that hat, that whatever it may be. 5 times today, I said something negative about somebody else. I criticized another in my mind or out loud. 5 times today, I had thoughts of lust. And then a week later, 1 time or no time. Then you know it's working. And if it's not changing, then it's important to reevaluate yourself spiritually. What am I doing or not doing that's not changing how I live? Because as Pujya Swamiji says, spirituality is not a weekend business. So it's not just about my prayers in the temple, or, I did Abhishek in the temple and somehow that should absolve me. Well, if you did Abhishek in the temple, and then as you walked out, and somebody was standing there and you pushed him out of the way and thought, my God, what an idiot. Well, your Abhishek is over. So it has to be that which actually goes within. It's not just I see Lord Shiva in the Shivling and I've offered my milk and I've offered my honey and I've offered the yoga, I've offered everything. Well, am I able then to see Lord Shiva and the guy standing in my way as I walk out of the mandir? Am I able to see him in all of the poor people lining the streets outside the mandir? And to not only use my money to buy my puja thali to go in and pour milk on it, but am I able to use some money to actually buy milk and feed it to these people? Is that spiritual practice actually changing how I think and move through the world? Is it making me more compassionate, more patient, more loving? Are people more and more drawn to me? Do I find more and more that people just want to be with me, work with me, talk to me, ask my, whatever it may be? Then something's happening. And you'll know. Yeah, we all know. Wonderful. Have a beautiful rest of your evening. And we'll see you all tomorrow, and hopefully it won't be raining and we will be able to be back out in our beautiful garden. But if it is raining, we'll be back in here. Either way, one or the other.